Welcome to the Win-Win Evangelism podcast. My name's Dr. Tina Waldron. In a nation where fewer people are exposed to the message of Jesus, it's more important than ever for churches and believers to be equipped to share their faith in genuine and culturally relevant ways. I'm the Director of Evangelism in Australia, and for the past 30 plus years, I've been training and equipping churches and believers to share their faith in relevant ways. Each week, this podcast will help you do exactly that. Enjoy the weekly interviews and teachings, and be sure to check out the questions in the show notes. These questions are designed so that you can use them in your church small group or simply by yourself. We're here to win, win, win. Well, welcome back to the show. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode with Rob Martin. We talked about how the upcoming Ideas Convention at Belgrave Heights, that's in Victoria, will help equip Christians to engage meaningfully with culture, and how it will help believers respond to culture's toughest questions and challenges. The goal, that you would walk away better prepared to have real, impactful conversations with the non-Christian people in your world and my world. Personally, I can't wait for the convention and to hear from some of the fantastic lineup of speakers. Well, this week, Rob's back with even more encouragement and insight from a podcast that he used to run called Bigger Questions. A while ago, he joined me to talk about some of the big questions that secular people are asking today and how we answer those. It became one of our most loved episodes. We looked at the following questions and how to answer. Where can we find hope in a world facing something like coronavirus? Is God really there in the middle of pain? And how can we thrive in anxious times? This episode today is packed with insights and keys to help you be a better witness. Enjoy the episode, and I'd love to see you at the Ideas Convention. Why don't we start with, what did you learn from that episode? Where can we find hope in a coronavirus world?
Yeah, that was a terrific show that I recorded last year. So the premise of Bigger Questions, what we try to do is to try to engage some of the objections or some of the things, the reasons people have to disbelieve in our culture. And we try to present a thoughtful, engaging, kind of Christian apologetic, for want of a better term, or try to provide reasons for people to see that God is real and that he can actually worth believing in and trusting. So I get all sorts of varieties of guests to explore the life's biggest questions. And the one that you just mentioned about hope in a coronavirus world, I had two guests, one Dr. Natasha Moore from the Center for Public Christianity, another one, Dr. Keith Suter, who's a futurist. So I kind of thought it was a fascinating conversation because Natasha Moore had just released a book called The Pleasures of Pessimism. And so I thought that's a really interesting book. And then Dr. Keith Suter is a futurist, so he looks to the future. And so I kind of thought this is an interesting combination. We're looking, is the future bleak? And if so, then maybe Natasha is going to love that because she's written a book on the pleasures of pessimism. Or is the future going to be completely dismal? And what is the future hold? And I think particularly we recorded that show probably at the height of the pandemic, when there was no vaccine. We weren't really sure what the future held, and so there was a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. And so I think that was really, I really tried to tap into that anxiety. Sorry, not to exploit it, but I suppose just to understand it and explore it a bit more. So hence, one of the things that Natasha pointed out in her reflections was that she said we are experiencing, and it's one of the things that's really endured with me, is that we're experiencing a genuine biblical apocalypse in the biblical sense of the term. An apocalypse in Greek really means an unveiling or a revealing. And I think what the coronavirus did was it unveiled and it revealed some of the challenges and problems of our society that were otherwise covered. So I think that was a fascinating reflection. So hence it exposed some of the inequalities of our society. It exposed some of the fact that people were serving, worshipping, longing for things that were taken away from lockdowns and other restrictions to travel and other freedoms being removed, which revealed actually that there was some deep underlying problems in our society. And so I think that was actually, in some respects, whilst it is genuinely sort of an apocalypse in that sense, it's an unveiling, it's a revealing, it reveals some challenges of our society. And I think that's where when you see those challenges, that's when I think that the hope of the Christian message actually is more profound and powerful, and actually offers something that people otherwise may not have wanted to consider, or perhaps thought worth considering, because my life's going, well, thank you very much. I don't really need to think about God. But actually, when those things are revealed, when we encounter the COVID apocalypse, so to speak, then actually, well, maybe the Christian message has something to say. So that's really one of the enduring things was, as I said, what Natasha says about being an apocalypse.
I love the way that you actually put it, how it's revealed some lacks or some things in our life. Because if I think of my neighbour, or I think of, a friend that's, not in the Christian space yet, that's a great way to have a conversation to say, look, for me, coronavirus has revealed some lacks or some challenges, within life, and being able to share those and asking the question, what's that been for you?
Exactly. And I think that's great questions to ask people, because I think it shows where hope is placed falsely or with undue confidence. So hence I find my meaning by having an overseas trip every year, for example. Well, that's been taken away. So where do you find meaning in that sense? Or where do I find, if I love travel, it's been removed. It's kind of, and hence there's a void in our lives, which I think our culture really struggles to deal with. And I think that was one of the challenges, the uneasiness and some of that our culture and people in our world face, I think, was because they had things that they had attached so much significance and meaning and purpose in their lives to, and then they've been taken away. And so what do I have? And that's where I think, again, the Christian message is because we have God who is always with us. We have a God who has a sure and a wonderful hope for the future. We have a God who loves us and cares for us and is with us even amidst pain and difficulty. Those things actually become much more significant and valuable when everything else has been stripped away. And I think that was one of the things that last year really uncovered. I think that was some of the things we touched on in that show. Where can we find hope in a coronavirus world? So we unpacked what coronavirus world looks like, what are some of the things that it's shown about us and our culture. But then we also looked at, well, actually the Christian message brings genuine and real hope and meaning and purpose to people's lives, and it is transformative. It actually shapes so much of the culture that we have today. Some of the benefits of our culture actually are shaped from people captured by that vision of hope and of the future and of what the Christian message offers. And it's been so transformative to our culture.
And it's taking that. I just love it, Rob. I love this stuff. It's taking this and simplifying that down for a neighbour. Like even saying things like that, gosh, before COVID, I loved my holidays as well. Mm. That was where I really was getting my sense of, I was looking forward to that. My hope is in that. I'm getting meaning and significance even from these things.
Yeah.
But that's all changed. How's it affected you? And then leaning into and sharing your own, well, as a Christian, I kind of view it, I've got to see it a little bit differently and just keeping it very simple. But yeah, that's unpacked it so well for me, Rob. Yeah. What else did you learn in that?
But I think also what you've said, I think is exactly right. It's not to say that, we're Christians, we're ascetics, we don't enjoy the things of the world. We don't enjoy going to restaurants or going to travel or anything. But I think what it does help us with, it helps us, I think, to articulate some of the different ways in which the Christian message is good news. Because it's more, so hence it's good news. And I think it's to help Christians realize that once some of the trappings of the world and some of the so-called idols of our culture, when they've been removed or diminished, we start to realize, well, what's really important in life? And I think it helps Christians to say, well, actually, look, I love my overseas travel. I love, eating at kind of funky Brunswick restaurants. I live in Brunswick, and so there's kind of funky cafes and the life that we can eat here. But at the same time, it's actually shown me that actually having a hope beyond the things of this world and having the peace of God in my heart and knowing that God is with me even though life is difficult actually brings me great peace and joy amidst difficulty. And I think that it marks Christians out to be very distinctive. And those things are actually, I think, attractive to a world that is longing for peace, longing for joy, and longing for hope, but they're putting it in the wrong place. So I think that's why the apocalypse, the COVID apocalypse, starts to try to actually help recalibrate, refocus, and get a clearer perspective, I think, on where things go. So I think one of the key things, we actually reflected on a passage from 1 Peter, which is there's a a new birth into a living hope. And that's really what the heart of the Christian message is, that the resurrection of Jesus brings a living hope. And it's not a dead hope. It's not a kind of a faded hope, or a hope that sort of might happen if my footy team happens to win the grand final. It's actually a sure hope based on historical reality, and actually transforms the future in a way that is positive and wonderful and beautiful. In fact, that's why it's called the gospel. It's good news. And I think that's helped to understand and unpack that, I think helps us to know in a deeper and a fresh and a profound way just how transformative and how good the Christian message really is.
Absolutely. I just love the podcast. I'm a big fan.
Oh, thank you.
Start following Bigger Questions if you're listening today, because you just get to, think through your faith a little deeper, and then try and answer, how can I now convey this to the world around me?
Yeah, that's right, Tina. And that's one of the things that I try to do in the show. I try to be the guest's best friend and worst enemy at the same time, because what I want, I don't want just pat answers or sort of fluffy answers. I actually want to ask genuinely what the questions that the non-believer is asking, or I anticipate. So I really work hard to try to find actual quotes from actual non-believers who ask these things, to actually say, well, how does the Christian message really deal with this real life objection or this real life question? So that I'm not just saying, well, I know we're Christians, I know it's a hard question, let's not think about it because let's just think about Jesus. Isn't that wonderful? It's actually kind of, I think, no, we really want to unpack and explore and understand the fault lines in the worldviews of those around us, so that we can really unpack that and show, actually, even when we ask the hardest objections from the most hardened non-believer, the Christian message still comes up with good things and truth and beauty and relevance for us today. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy about unpacking in the show.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant, and you do a great job.
Let me ask you a question. Are you equipped to share your faith? Is your church ready to do the same? Our evangelism training helps both individual believers and church leaders foster a culture of evangelism. It equips everyday Christians to have natural faith conversations and provides pastors with the tools to train their church. With flexible online resources, you can learn at your own pace, anytime, anywhere. Don't leave evangelism to chance. Visit evangelisminaustralia.com to get started.
So let me ask you about this next one, because it kind of connects to this, where can we find hope in coronavirus world? This episode on, can God be there in the pain? What type of answers came out in that would be helpful for us today?
Yeah, because suffering is one of the big objections to the Christian faith, because if God's all powerful and all loving, then why is there pain in the world? And I think it's a really good question, and I think it's worth pondering and reflecting on that. And I've done a number of shows on suffering. In fact, it's probably been one of the most common sort of major or meta objection to the Christian faith. It's an irony as well, because it's often through suffering that people actually have their most deepest and profound connections with God. And I think that's what we explored in that podcast, because that was with a guy called John Hudson, who had done a lot of thinking in suffering and the problem of evil, which is sort of a philosophical problem. But I think one of the things there's a couple of things that we really pushed into in that episode. One was he made a comment which really resonated with me, was, don't waste your tears. Because I think he's actually trying to help us to see that sometimes through suffering and through our pain and through difficulty, God can, in many cases, use that to transform us, grow us, and shape us, and build our character. And hence, there's something bigger going on. Now, that can only happen, I think, if you have a God there overseeing the process or overseeing our lives. Because if it is kind of random, then, well, you just kind of pick yourself up and hope for the best. But actually knowing that God's good, knowing that God is loving, that our tears don't have to be wasted, because it can actually transform us and move us into a greater sense of ourselves, our understanding in this world, but also of our connection with God and building as a person and in the character that God wants us to be. So I think that was a really powerful thing for me, I think, from that one as well.
Yeah. And it is very powerful to, even though it's very hard, like I'm think of a friend or a neighbour that I can actually have a conversation with and share my own pain. Just say they're asking that question, can God be there in the pain? If I can share my own experience from my Christian worldview to explain that even through the tears, it has shaped my life positively, or it's helped me see things differently, helped me be whatever it is, because we don't want to trivialize people's pain. But yes, as a Christian, we very much and often do grasp the good things out of it, and to encourage others to actually reflect on that themselves, does bring hope.
Yeah, that's right. And connected to that, I think this is where the show ended up reflecting on as well, was the best example of that is not necessarily just our lives, but the example of Jesus himself, because he suffered immensely. And I think that, so you can ask, where is God in the pain? Well, Jesus himself suffered, and Jesus himself cried, and he died. And so there's a sense in which God understands and experienced suffering, and I think that can bring great comfort and peace to us as we reflect on, well, how can God be there how can God be there amidst the pain? Well, Jesus suffered, God himself suffered, and I think that demonstrates that at least God is not unfamiliar with suffering, and he understands the challenges that we go through. And I think also connected to that is his presence through suffering. So as you've said, you could just say, okay, well, God's not there. I'm just I'm crying and I'm in pain, but it can be very, very lonely. And so I think, again, having someone, and again, this is the comfort and the peace of the gospel that it brings, is that having someone who is present with you in suffering actually brings tremendous hope and comfort, I think.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I agree with you. It's funny to listen to this conversation today, Rob, because you are so good at bringing here's the reality of Jesus, here's what the Bible says, and then I've got this side of where I'm talking from, where I'm sharing with my neighbour and friend, sharing my experience. It's very relational, but still there's many of my friends that are very open to me mentioning those comments that you've just made. They're open, they're at that level. You know what? We journey with people. Some of them, you're just not even going to mention the name of Jesus. You're just going to be Jesus. And then some down the track are very much, I can say something more. And I think you're really showing me today the connection between those and how we could, just as everyday believers, make those connections or take the conversation that little further.
Yeah. And I think obviously it does depend a bit on the relationship that you have with your friend or your neighbor. But I think one of the things potentially you could say is that, well, this is really important to me, and I find great comfort in the person that I love and revere in Jesus Christ. He actually died himself, and I really sort of resonate with that suffering. So at least I know that. Well, at least that I know that my suffering is not without purpose, and at least so maybe some conversations like that, perhaps to sort of connect it to your own personal testimony about, say, well, Jesus is really important to me. It actually makes a difference to me, and that's where I gain a lot of strength and comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was talking with some people this morning, and we talk about that in our online course about how do you actually say that in a way that's acceptable, being a bit more casual about it, definitely not in their face. And yeah, absolutely.
No,
and we can
agree.
have those big conversations with the right body language is very helpful.
Oh, absolutely. I think the right posture towards your friends is absolutely critical. And I think because our culture, one of the things that I try to do with Bigger Questions is not to be too preachy. I think it's not that there's nothing wrong with necessarily preaching, but I suppose that to some non-believers, they really get turned off by people being a bit pushy. And so I think it's really trying to actually, we want to explore conversations, explore things, and well, this is the reality for someone. What do you make of it? What do you think? Like, that's actually asking good questions, I think, can be a good way of beginning conversations with our friends.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Just loving this conversation. I think I want to have you back at some point so we can ask some of the other big questions as well.
There's over 200 of them, so there's plenty of big questions. That was actually a bit of a surprise to me. I was wondering when I the show is called Bigger Questions, and I thought, are we going to run out of bigger questions after we've covered some of the major ones? But after over 200 shows, I'm still not running out. So yeah, there's plenty of them out there, plenty of good questions.
And then the pandemic hit and you've got another 200 questions.
That's right.
So what about this one? Thriving amidst anxious times. Who are you talking to? And what, because we are certainly in anxious times.
We are. In fact, as that show, spoiler alert, in that show, we start talking about the age of anxiety. I think it was interesting because the age of anxiety, there was a poem written in the late 1940s called Age of Anxiety. And I think that it was interesting that our world was kind of dubbed an anxious world even just straight after the Second World War. But I think that has only increased, if anything, in our culture, particularly in the last 20 years or so. I think our culture is deeply anxious. So I interviewed there a psychologist and singer-songwriter, Nikki Chiswell. So she's a musician, performer. She's been in church circles for a number of years, but she's been talking with lots of people about anxiety. In fact, it was actually part of her own personal story. And that's one of the things I love about trying a great bigger question show. And I think I'm glad you've touched on that one, because I think that's one of the best shows in recent years or recent months that we've done, because it really covered all the things we tried to cover in a bigger question show. Interesting reflections on a big contemporary topic, and a really great, powerful personal story where she shared her own personal testimony of where she struggled with anxiety even as a child, even as an infant in primary school. She struggled with anxiety, but when she discovered the God who is with us and is always present, I think it helped her to understand that God loved her. He wasn't trying to judge her or be critical. Obviously, there was obviously judgment a key part of the Christian message, but he was. But there was a God who was for her and loved her. Was absolutely transformative for her and for her, and understanding then again the idea that we reflected on Philippians 4 and about finding that don't be anxious. And I asked the question, so it isn't just saying someone don't be anxious to someone who's anxious just the worst thing you can say, because it's like saying, stop worrying, don't worry, but you don't, and then you start worrying about what you're worrying. And but actually they said, no, the reason that we cannot be anxious is because God is near. And again, so it comes back to that presence of God, which even connects to that question of suffering, because really the question of anxiety is in some respects a subset of the question of suffering. Like, why am I? Because it's something that we are struggling with. But again, I think one of the key answers and the ways that we can think about that is, again, this idea of a God who's powerful and is bigger than us, who loves us and is with us. And I think that can be really calming and help reduce our anxiety. Because if God is for us and if he is stronger and bigger than us and he's in control, then it does help us to realize that we're not running the world. God can run the world. And I think our anxiety is often stemmed from the fact that we try to control everything and run the world. And I think when we step back and let God be God, or actually trust someone who's bigger than us, actually, again, it can really help with struggling with anxiety. And also we draw the distinction between an anxious world and an anxiety disorder. An anxiety disorder is separate and different. And we touched on that in the show as well. But I think it's more this idea that this anxiousness, this striving, this kind of driving that we have as a culture, and we're trying to achieve everything under the sun, so to speak. But I think when we can step back and realize that we can't control everything, again, we can have, I think, peace and comfort knowing that there is someone greater than us in control.
Yeah. So that must have been a powerful little episode, because we can talk about this and we can know these concepts as Christians and talk about anxiety and casting our cares on the Lord and all these things, but having someone actually share their story of how this has really helped them, that's what we need to hear, right? Because, the neighbours, we have this, it's funny how Aussies have the BS meter. They know when, I don't want to say that word on the show, but I'm sure you know what I mean if you're listening to this. So having someone actually share their story, because a story is just so powerful because it's your truth. And hearing that girl share her story, it's just really helpful. I guess as Christians too, when we're sharing with our friends, you want to share your real story of how Christ has helped you in this, of the anxious times or painful times or hope in this coronavirus world.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think this is one of the things that I've learned probably more than anything else from the show. I get a real sense that it has helped me understand and more fully grasp how good the good news of Jesus is. I know and it's partly forgiveness of sins is at the heart of the Christian message. That's really, but that really then is transformative in so other areas of our lives. And knowing that God is in control, that knowing that He loves us and He does forgive us, and knowing that He's with us always. There's so many ways in which the Christian message is such good news to our culture, and I think this is why we've got to get out there and share it better, I suppose, haven't we, Tina? We've got to be able to be empowered to realize. And I think empowered to share, I suppose, the difference that it makes for us. And for me, I think now that I'm better equipped as of doing this show for a number of years and having over 200 episodes, which is hearing 200 stories and 200 reflections, is to know that there are, it helps me realize how good the good news of Jesus really is, in so many tangible and real ways, and so many stories of people's lives who have been transformed. And it's often people who are anxious or trying to prove themselves, and actually realize that in the gospel, in being connected to Jesus, that actually I don't need to. I can have peace, I can have joy, I can have hope, I can have comfort, I can have forgiveness in so many areas of my life, which just makes a tangible and real difference today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are salt and light. It's not like we need to try and be salt and light. The more people I talk to as well, I realise the same, Rob. I think, gosh, the life I'm living is really quite extraordinary. It's so far from what your average Aussie that doesn't know Christ. It's just so far. You see how extraordinary it is to do life with Jesus through all of these types of times, particularly when you speak to people that experience life differently, or hear stories of how the Christian faith is active in their life. So this has been wonderful. I just love listening to a particular different side of the coin, so to speak, of where you're coming from. Thank you, Rob. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat today, and thank you so much for giving your time.